$50,000 bail. The verdict rang out, heavy as a sentence preordained. Naomi Carter stood frozen, a wave of dizziness washing over her as Judge Gregory Hawthorne smirked, the grin of someone who had already won. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Her breath caught in her chest. Murmurs filled the courtroom, but Naomi could hear nothing but the frantic beating of her own heart. She glanced at Prosecutor Ethan LOL, the one who had casually demanded the bail amount she could never pay. He remained unfazed, as if this were all just a game they had set up long ago. Naomi gripped the trembling file tightly in her hands. She was innocent, but that didn't matter here. In this room, justice was not for the weak. The courtroom door swung open. 2 guards approached, their handcuffs gleaming. And then, a voice echoed, "Stop." The entire courtroom fell silent. Who had spoken? Was this the turning point, or just a fleeting hope before everything came crashing down? Could Naomi escape this meticulously set trap, or would she become the next victim of a corrupt judicial system? Stay tuned until the end to uncover the shocking truth behind this case. If you believe justice must be served and want to continue following these emotional, dramatic stories, hit the subscribe button on Emotional Journey now. Naomi Carter woke up before the sun rose, just like any other day. She didn't need an alarm clock. Her body had grown accustomed to the busy rhythm of a single mother's life. The street lights cast their glow through the window, reflecting off the cream-colored walls of her small apartment. Not far away, the sounds of traffic began to roll along the roads leading into Crestview. Naomi stretched, feeling a slight ache in her shoulder from a restless sleep. Long nights were often spent tossing and turning with 100 thoughts racing through her mind. Bills to pay, work at the bank, and most of all, how to give Lena a better life. But this morning, she allowed herself a brief moment of peace, taking a deep breath before leaving the bed. Her apartment wasn't large, but it was neat and orderly. On the kitchen table sat a pile of paperwork she hadn't gotten to the night before. Tuition notices, utility bills, and a bank envelope she hadn't opened yet. Naomi glanced at it, but decided to deal with it later. She had more important things to do. She walked to Lena's small bedroom, where her daughter still slept, curled up in her soft blanket with an old teddy bear clutched in her arms. Looking at her daughter resting peacefully, Naomi felt as if the whole world had shrunk into this moment. Lena was everything to her, the reason she kept pushing forward no matter how many obstacles lay ahead. Naomi gently woke her daughter. "Lena, it's time, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing her fingers through her daughter's soft curls. Lena mumbled sleepily before opening her big brown eyes, gazing at her mom with a sleepy look. "Mom, I'm still tired," she murmured, hugging her teddy bear tightly. Naomi smiled and bent down to kiss her forehead. "How about I make pancakes with the honey you like?" Lena immediately sat up, her face lighting up. That was Naomi's favorite part, how a small gesture could make Lena so happy. And in that moment, it made all her worries fade away. After preparing breakfast for the two of them, Naomi quickly dressed for work. The light gray suit she wore was probably a little worn, but she took good care of it, wanting to look professional. She looked in the mirror, smoothing down the collar, telling herself that today would be a good day. She had an important meeting with the bank's director, and if all went well, she might be considered for a higher position. That meant a raise, and life for her and Lena would be a little easier. But a part of her still felt uneasy because recently the bank had been making changes that she couldn't quite explain. After dropping Lena off at school, Naomi drove her old car to the Crestview Center. The car had been with her for many years, its engine sometimes making an annoying clanking sound, but she never complained. It still got her to work every day, still took her and Lena to the park on weekends, and most importantly, it never let her down, unlike the men in her life. Thinking about it, Naomi sighed softly. She didn't have time for love, didn't have time for luxuries like dating. Work and her daughter were all that mattered. When she arrived at the bank's parking lot, a strange feeling swept over her. The Crestview Bank building still stood there, its glass windows reflecting the morning sun, but today, for some reason, it looked colder than usual. Naomi stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, and walked into the building with a polite smile on her face. What she didn't know was that this would be one of the last mornings she would walk into that building as an employee. Naomi walked into Crestview Bank with a sense of familiarity, but something felt off. As usual, she spent the first few minutes checking the transactions in the system, reviewing the large sums of money transferred the previous day. But recently, she had noticed something unusual. Some customers had come to her with confused faces, complaining that their account balances didn't match what they remembered. They insisted that they hadn't made any significant withdrawals or transfers. Yet, when Naomi checked the system, everything appeared legitimate, with no signs of hacking or technical errors. At first, she thought they might be mistaken, but as the number of customers reporting issues grew, she realized she couldn't ignore this any longer. One late afternoon, Naomi decided to report the issue to her superior. She gathered a list of the affected accounts, along with the unusual transactions she had found, and went to see Arthur Whitmore, the bank's regional manager. Standing outside his office door, she hesitated. Arthur was a powerful man, known for being tough and unpredictable, but Naomi knew she couldn't remain silent if something was amiss. The bank's customers were being seriously affected. She knocked on the door, took a deep breath, and stepped in. Arthur looked up from his desk, his cold gaze quickly scanning the file in her hand. "What's this about, Carter?" His voice was deep and commanding, giving Naomi the sense that she was interrupting something more important. Naomi calmly explained the issues she had discovered. She detailed the accounts with unusual activity and the unexplained transactions. But Arthur simply leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, and listened without showing any emotion. When she finished, he stared at her for a long moment before casually responding. "I think you're blowing this out of proportion, Carter. If the system isn't reporting any errors, there's nothing to worry about." Naomi was taken aback. She couldn't believe her superior was dismissing such a serious issue so easily. "But sir, customers are reporting it, and the number of suspicious transactions is increasing. I think we should check the system again or investigate further." She hadn't finished her sentence when Arthur raised his hand to cut her off. "I don't want my employees wasting time on trivial matters. You should focus on your job instead of worrying about things that aren't your concern." His voice had hardened, like a warning. Naomi bit her lip, clearly sensing that Arthur had no intention of looking into the matter. Leaving Arthur's office with a feeling of unease, Naomi returned to her desk, but her mind was still in turmoil. Something wasn't right. Those transactions couldn't be a mere coincidence. If Arthur wasn't going to investigate, who would? When she shared her concerns with a close colleague, the person immediately lowered their voice, their eyes filled with fear. "Listen, Naomi, this is not something you should be getting involved in. We're just employees. Don't mess with things beyond our control." Naomi furrowed her brow. The comment sounded like a warning, but a warning about what? Was someone manipulating the system, or was this just a series of coincidences? She didn't know, but a strong intuition told her that if she kept digging, things wouldn't be as simple as they seemed. After a long, exhausting day at the bank, Naomi returned home with a heavy heart. The unusual transactions she had discovered haunted her throughout the day, but what troubled her even more was the way Arthur Whitmore had dismissed all of her warnings. No one at the bank seemed willing to talk about the issue, and their eerie silence made Naomi feel as though she were walking on thin ice. But she pushed all those thoughts aside when she saw Lena sitting on the living room rug, happily coloring her favorite cartoon pictures. The sight of her daughter brought Naomi a sense of relief. No matter how cruel the world outside might be, at least when she came home, she still had Lena, her most precious treasure in life. While Lena was engrossed in her cartoons, Naomi stepped outside to check the mailbox, as usual. She opened the mailbox and pulled out a stack of envelopes, an electric bill, an advertisement from the local grocery store, and one strange letter. It was a plain white envelope with no distinguishing marks except for a red seal, stamped with the Crestview Court logo. A chill ran down her spine. She blinked, her heart racing as she stared at the letter in her hand. A wave of unease surged through her as she shakily opened the envelope, pulling out a pale yellow sheet of paper with bold letters at the top. Summons. She read each line with shallow breaths, her hands gripping the paper as though it could vanish at any moment. Defendant, Naomi Carter, please appear at Crestview Court on October 14th to face charges including financial fraud, embezzlement, and breach of contract. Amount involved, $85,000. Naomi felt the world spinning around her. She read and reread each word, trying to find some sign that this was just a cruel prank. But no, it was an official document with a signature and a legal seal. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it echo in her mind. $85,000? Embezzlement? She had never touched a cent that wasn't hers. So why was she being accused? Her fingers clenched tightly around the edge of the paper, a wave of terror rising within her. This was no simple mistake. Someone was trying to ruin her. But who? And why? Naomi rushed back into the house, her legs trembling so much she nearly collided with the small coffee table in the living room. Lena looked up from her coloring, innocently asking, "Mom, what's wrong?" Naomi looked at her daughter, trying to suppress the panic. She couldn't let Lena see her weakness. She couldn't let her feel any danger. She forced a smile, a strained one, but just enough to hide the fear rising inside her. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just an important letter from Mommy." But Lena still looked at her with a curious gaze, as if sensing something wasn't right. Naomi quickly moved into the bedroom, closed the door, and leaned against it. She read the letter again, desperately trying to find something that might explain what was happening. But everything was painfully clear. She was summoned. She was being charged. And if she didn't appear in court, a warrant for her arrest would likely be issued. She immediately grabbed her phone and called the bank. A female voice at the switchboard answered. "Hello, this is Crestview Bank. How can I assist you?" Naomi struggled to stay calm, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I'm Naomi Carter. I just received a summons from the court regarding an accusation of financial fraud. I need to speak with Director Arthur Whitmore immediately." A moment of silence followed. Then the cold voice on the other end replied, "Mr. Whitmore is currently out of the office. If you have any legal matters, please contact your attorney." Naomi gripped the phone tightly, feeling panic surge within her. Why hadn't the bank contacted her before she received the summons? Why hadn't they informed her of anything? And more importantly, why was Arthur Whitmore missing at this crucial moment? She realized then that she had been completely abandoned. No one was on her side. She was left alone to face a battle she didn't even understand, against an enemy she couldn't even see. Naomi dropped the phone onto the bed, her hands clutching her head. It felt as though the entire world was collapsing around her. But she couldn't break down. She needed to find a way to protect herself. A thought flashed in her mind. "I need a lawyer. I need to find out who did this to me. And most importantly, I have to fight." However, Naomi had no idea that this was only the beginning of her nightmare. Naomi barely slept through the night. The words in the summons replayed in her mind like a sentence already passed. She tried to think logically, to find a way to protect herself, but the more she thought, the more lost she felt. She had no lawyer. She had no one to turn to. She didn't have the money to hire a top-tier attorney. But first, she needed to go to the bank to clarify everything. This had to be a mistake, and if she could talk to Arthur Whitmore or anyone in the management, things might be sorted out. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual, trying to maintain a calm exterior so that Lena wouldn't sense anything wrong. She prepared breakfast for her daughter as usual, but inside, her mind was a mess. When she dropped Lena off at school, she kissed her forehead, telling herself that when she returned to pick her up, everything would be fine. But little did she know, today would change her life forever. Naomi drove to the bank, but as soon as she stepped into the building, an eerie silence surrounded her. The colleagues who usually greeted her every morning now only glanced at her and turned away, as if they feared speaking to her might bring trouble. She felt their scrutinizing gazes, their hesitant looks, as if she were a stranger. The coldness spread through her body as she made her way toward the elevator. But just as she was a few steps from the reception desk, two security guards approached and blocked her path. They were the same guards she saw every day, but today their expressions were cold and distant. "Miss Carter," one of them spoke in a mechanical tone, as if reading from a script, "we've been instructed not to allow you inside. Your employment has been suspended indefinitely, effective immediately." Naomi blinked, the shock hitting her like a punch to the chest. "What? Why? I need to see Mr. Whitmore right now. This is definitely a misunderstanding." The security guard didn't move, only repeating in a flat tone, "We're just following orders. If you have any questions, please contact the legal department." She looked around, searching for a familiar face, someone who might speak up for her. But no one dared come near. Some even lowered their heads, pretending to be busy, avoiding her gaze. Those who used to chat with her every day, those who shared stories during lunch breaks, now acted as if she didn't exist. A wave of humiliation surged within Naomi. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I won't leave here without a proper explanation." One of the security guards quietly raised his hand to his radio, whispering something. Less than a minute later, a woman in a dark suit stepped out from the office behind, holding a stack of files. It was Miranda Shaw, the bank's human resources manager. She walked toward Naomi, her face devoid of emotion. Naomi, Miranda spoke in a detached tone, as if reading a financial report. We regret to inform you that due to serious charges against you, the management has decided to suspend your employment with immediate effect. You are not permitted to continue working at Crestview Bank until a final decision from the court. Naomi clenched her fists. What charges? I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't been given any explanation. Miranda shrugged slightly, as if it weren't her problem. All the information has been sent to the legal department. If you have any questions, I advise you to consult a lawyer. Naomi felt a surge of anger rising within her, but she knew if she lost control now, the situation would only worsen. She took a deep breath, trying to rein in her emotions. At least can I retrieve my personal belongings? Miranda exchanged a glance with the guards, then shook her head. We will arrange to have them sent to your home address later. That was it. They had not only taken her job away, but they had treated her like a criminal, denying her the chance to retrieve anything that belonged to her. Naomi felt her dignity trampled, but above all, she understood this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. This was a plan that had been set in motion. She was the scapegoat in a larger conspiracy. As she stepped out of the bank, Naomi felt her legs trembling. A cold breeze swept past her, but what chilled her to the bone wasn't the weather. It was the fear of what awaited her next. She knew she couldn't trust anyone anymore, and worst of all, she didn't know if she could escape this nightmare. Naomi drove home with the weight on her chest, as if a heavy stone was pressing down on her. She no longer remembered how she got through the drive, only that her hands trembled every time she gripped the steering wheel. The image of the security guards blocking her path, her colleagues turning their backs on her, as if she were a stranger, and the cold voice of Miranda, Shaw still echoed in her head. She had no job, no income, and worst of all, she was about to stand trial for a crime she didn't commit. But right now, what mattered more than anything was Lena, her precious daughter. When Naomi stepped into the apartment, Lena immediately ran toward her, her small feet gliding across the wooden floor, wrapping her arms tightly around her mother. "Mom's home," Lena exclaimed, her bright voice the only thing that made Naomi feel like she still existed in this world. Naomi bent down to hug her, inhaling the familiar scent of baby shampoo, a soothing and comforting smell that almost made her cry. "I'm home, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice faltering. Lena looked up at her mother, her curious eyes watching her intently. "Mom, what's wrong? You look sad." Naomi swallowed hard, trying to hold it together. "I'm okay, sweetie. I'm just a little tired today." The little girl blinked, not quite convinced by her mother's words. Naomi knew that Lena was much smarter than her age suggested. No matter how hard she tried to hide it, Lena could still sense that something wasn't right. Naomi tried to keep things normal. She helped Lena change into her pajamas, prepared dinner, and read a book to her before bed. But as she was reading the part where the princess found her way home, Lena suddenly asked, "Mom, are you sure everything will be okay?" Naomi froze. She tightened her grip on the book in her hands, feeling a sharp pain in her chest. She wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that there was nothing to worry about, but she couldn't because she didn't know what was waiting for her. She gently pulled Lena into her arms, running her fingers through her soft hair. "I promise," she whispered, "I'll always protect you." But as those words left her lips, tears silently fell down her cheeks. This might be the last night she held her daughter in her arms, because tomorrow she would have to face the trial where everything could change forever. Naomi walked into the Crestview courthouse on a cold morning. She had never imagined the day would come when she would stand in front of the judge as a defendant, accused of a crime she couldn't even comprehend. It felt as if the entire world had turned its back on her, as if everything she had ever believed in, everything she had worked so hard to build, was crumbling overnight. The courtroom wasn't crowded, but the air was heavy with tension. The long wooden benches, the cold fluorescent lights, and the unfamiliar faces sitting behind the large wooden doors made the room feel impersonal and oppressive. Naomi stepped in, feeling every eye in the room fixed on her. Some people looked at her with curiosity, others with a hint of pity, but most were indifferent, cold. To them, she was just another woman caught in the gears of the legal system, a small case among thousands that passed through these halls every day. She looked around, trying to find a familiar face, someone who might stand by her side, but there was no one. No friends, no colleagues, no family, not even a lawyer. Naomi had tried to reach out to some local lawyers the night before, but all of them asked for fees she couldn't afford. She had called a few legal aid organizations, but they told her her case would take time to review, and the trial was too soon for them to intervene. The feeling of abandonment overwhelmed Naomi as she walked toward the defendant's table. A police officer led her to a seat, then left without saying a word. Her heart pounded in her chest, her hands trembling under the table. Across from her, on the other side of the courtroom, Prosecutor Ethan LOL was arranging his documents, exuding confidence as if this was just a simple trial with the outcome already decided. Naomi swallowed hard, trying to take deep breaths to calm herself. She closed her eyes for a moment, praying for some kind of miracle to occur. But when she opened her eyes again, nothing had changed. She was still there, alone, facing a legal system for which she had no preparation. Did she still have any chance to save herself? Or had she become just a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing? Naomi sat frozen as Judge Gregory Hawthorne banged his gavel, announcing the start of the trial. A wave of fear swept over her, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had hoped that she could present the truth, that there might be some justice for her. But as Prosecutor Ethan LOL stood up, adjusting his tie with an air of calm, she realized that everything was not as simple as she had imagined. Ethan LOL began with a smooth, sharp tone. He didn't strike immediately, but instead led the story step by step, as if this were a simple and straightforward case. He projected documents on the screen, financial records, transaction reports Naomi had never seen before. Every number matched perfectly with the missing amounts, and in the corner of the documents, Naomi Carter's name appeared boldly. "Honorable Court," Ethan said, his voice calm but authoritative, "this is not a simple mistake. This is an act of deliberate abuse of power, exploiting the trust of clients in the very bank the defendant once worked for." Naomi's eyes widened, each breath feeling heavier. Those documents, when had they been prepared? Why was her name appearing on these transactions? For the past 6 months, Ethan continued, Naomi Carter has secretly transferred funds from multiple client accounts, using insider information from the bank to cover her tracks. She embezzled a total of $85,000, and all of it is backed by solid evidence. The room buzzed with murmurs. Naomi felt as though someone had shoved her into an abyss. She knew she was innocent, but the evidence before her seemed to condemn her completely. She looked at the screen, desperately searching for a mistake, for something that could exonerate her, but everything appeared terrifyingly flawless. Judge Hawthorne looked at her with cold, piercing eyes. "Miss Carter, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Naomi swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table. "I didn't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know where those transactions came from. I've never touched a cent." Ethan LOL smiled mockingly. "So, you're saying someone used your information to do this?" "Yes." Naomi almost jumped out of her seat. "I believe someone at the bank used my account to make these transactions. I don't have access to some of the accounts on that list. If you look closely, you'll see." "Objection," Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp as a knife. "The defendant is trying to deflect. She is the only one who had access to these accounts when the transactions were made. The system logs prove this." Naomi felt as though she had just been punched in the chest. System logs? She had never accessed those accounts. But what if someone had forged her login details? How could she prove that? Judge Hawthorne nodded, signaling for Ethan to continue. The prosecutor flipped through more documents, then presented one detail that made the room fall silent. "And here, Your Honor," Ethan said, his eyes gleaming with triumph, "is Naomi Carter's personal bank statement for the past 6 months. Naomi felt a chill run down her spine as a copy of her bank statement appeared on the screen. It showed several large sums of money deposited into her account, some she had never seen before. "Why did your account balance suddenly increase during this time if you weren't the one who took that money?" Ethan asked, his voice dripping with provocation. Naomi shook her head, panic rising within her. "I don't know where that money came from. I never received any such deposits." The room went quiet for a moment. Judge Hawthorne silently observed Naomi, then slowly tapped his gavel. "Miss Carter, based on what I see, all the evidence is against you. If you cannot provide a reasonable explanation, I fear the jury won't need much time to come to a verdict." Naomi opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She felt as though she was being pulled into an inescapable nightmare. Everything had been perfectly arranged to prevent her from defending herself. Not only was she being accused, but she was being trapped in a way that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't prove her innocence. And she began to understand that she wasn't just the victim of a false accusation. She was a pawn in a much larger conspiracy. Naomi was nearly paralyzed as she heard the amount echoed in the courtroom: $50,000. It wasn't just a number. It was a sentence already handed down, a blatant insult, a declaration that she was not entitled to fair treatment. Her breath caught in her chest, and her hands clenched the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She looked up at Judge Gregory Hawthorne, hoping to find some flicker of justice in his gaze, but instead, all she saw was cold disdain. Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. The corner of his mouth curled into a half-smile. Given the severity of the charges, I believe $50,000 is a reasonable bail amount. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning Naomi as if evaluating a cheap commodity. If the defendant cannot post bail, she will be held in custody until the official trial date. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Naomi felt her mind spin. $50,000? She didn't even have $500 in her account. How could she possibly come up with that massive sum? If she couldn't pay bail, she would be thrown into jail, stripped of her freedom, treated as a real criminal. She wanted to scream that she was innocent, that everything happening was a mistake, but she knew no one here cared about that. Ethan LOL, the cunning prosecutor, stood there with a smug satisfaction. He didn't need to say anything more. Everything was going exactly as he had planned. Another pawn had fallen into the trap. Naomi looked around the room, hoping to find even a sliver of support, but there was no one. Old colleagues. Gone. Friends. They had disappeared the moment she was accused. Family. She only had Lena, but her daughter was too young to understand what was happening. Her breathing became shallow, a suffocating feeling filling her chest. This wasn't a trial seeking truth. This was a perfectly orchestrated play. Fake evidence, non-existent transactions, and now an absurd bail amount she could never pay. The goal wasn't to try her. It was to destroy her completely. She swallowed, trying to stay composed. Your Honor, I don't have that money. Her voice was hoarse. But Judge Hawthorne didn't seem bothered in the slightest. He just shuffled through the stack of files in front of him, as though she were a tedious task he wanted to finish quickly. That is not the court's concern, he said flatly. You may seek assistance from a lawyer or family. If you cannot post bail, I'm afraid you'll become acquainted with Crestview Detention Center. Naomi felt like she had just been punched in the stomach. She turned to the court clerk, then to the officers standing nearby. No one showed any sympathy. They had seen too many people like her pulled into this brutal legal system, only to disappear into cold prisons, forgotten by everyone. Judge Hawthorne banged the gavel on the table. This court is adjourned. The defendant will be remanded into custody immediately. Those words hit her like a blade. A police officer stepped forward, ordering her to stand. Everything was happening so fast. Just a few days ago, she was a regular bank employee working hard to support her daughter. Now, she was being treated as a criminal, about to be locked up in a place she never imagined she would step into. When the officer's hand landed on her shoulder, Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. But what hurt the most wasn't the fear for herself. It was the fear for Lena. What would happen to her daughter if she was imprisoned? Who would take care of her? Would Lena think her mother had abandoned her? The thought made her eyes well up, but she bit her lip, determined not to let the tears fall in front of those waiting for her to break. Before she was led away, she looked up one last time. Her gaze met Prosecutor Ethan LOL and Judge Gregory Hawthorne. Both of them showed no emotion, as if she were just another insignificant case in the pile of daily trials they handled. But Naomi knew this wasn't a coincidence. Someone had wanted to destroy her, and now she had to find out who that was. Naomi stood frozen as the two guards approached. She could hear their heavy footsteps, the metallic clink as one of them opened the shining handcuffs. The coldness of the metal seemed to slice into her skin even before it touched her wrist. She wanted to run, to scream that this was a mistake, but her mouth was dry, unable to form any words. The people around her, the judge, the prosecutor, the people in the courtroom, were all silent, as if they were too accustomed to this scene. No one stood by her side. Naomi felt her legs weaken beneath her. She had never imagined she would end up in this situation. How had everything escalated so quickly? Just a few days ago, she had been a regular bank employee, a single mother trying to make ends meet for her daughter. And now, she was being treated like a criminal. Everything she had worked so hard to build, Everything she had fought to protect was being stripped away right before her eyes. The first guard placed a hand on her arm, preparing to pull her forward. Naomi instinctively recoiled, but they quickly tightened their grip, not allowing her any chance to resist. She felt her breath become shallow, a suffocating feeling rising in her chest. Her fingers dug into the edge of the defendant's table, desperately trying to hold on to some control, but it was useless. As the cold cuffs were about to clamp around her wrists, a voice rang out, cutting through the stillness of the room. "You're making a grave mistake." The entire courtroom seemed to freeze. The words reverberated through the space, bringing a sudden charge of tension through everyone present. The onlookers whispered. Prosecutor Ethan LOL frowned, and Judge Hawthorne raised an eyebrow, visibly annoyed. But Naomi, almost holding her breath, turned her head, trying to find the source of the voice. The courtroom door swung open. A man entered, calm but exuding an unmistakable air of authority. In his hand, he carried a thick stack of files. His sharp eyes scanned the room before they landed on the judge. He was neither afraid nor hesitant. "Special Agent Victor Hahn, FBI," the man introduced briefly, then tossed the stack of files onto the defendant's table. "And I think you'll want to see what I've brought before you continue with this case against Miss Carter." Naomi's eyes widened. FBI? Why were they here? And more importantly, was this her chance to turn the tables? Or was this just another plot she hadn't anticipated? The atmosphere in the courtroom grew thick with tension as Special Agent Victor Hahn walked in, each of his steps cutting through the silence like a blade. Those present in the room exchanged glances, clearly shocked by the sudden appearance of the FBI. Judge Gregory Hawthorne frowned, unable to hide his annoyance. Prosecutor Ethan LOL narrowed his eyes, his hands subconsciously tightening around the documents in front of him. Victor Hahn wasted no time. He moved toward the defendant's table and slammed a thick file down with calm authority. "We have evidence that Naomi Carter has been framed," he declared. The words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room. Whispers broke out as skeptical glances turned toward the agent. Judge Hawthorne struggled to maintain his composure, but couldn't hide his impatience. "Agent Hahn, I don't know what the FBI has to do with this case, but this is a legal trial. If you have crucial information, please present it clearly." Victor opened the file and spread out a series of documents, including bank statements. In recent weeks, the FBI has been investigating a series of suspicious transactions at Crestview Bank. "We discovered that a large amount of money had been embezzled, and Naomi Carter was merely a pawn used to cover the tracks," he said, pausing to glance at Prosecutor LOL. "I have reason to believe that some individuals within the legal system are aware of this, but continue to push her into a corner." Naomi held her breath. She couldn't believe someone was finally standing up for her. But before she could speak, Judge Hawthorne slammed his gavel down. "I will not allow any interference that disrupts the trial. If the FBI has evidence, they should submit it through proper channels. For now, we will continue with the proceedings." Victor stared at the judge for a long moment. He knew what was happening. Someone wanted to make sure Naomi Carter was convicted, no matter the truth. Despite the FBI's intervention, things were not easy for Naomi. She had no bail money, and Judge Hawthorne quickly issued an order for her to be held in custody until the official trial. As she was let out of the courtroom, Naomi felt like prey being escorted to the slaughter. She knew this system was not built for people like her. Crestview Detention Center was nothing like she had imagined. There was no justice, no hope, only despair enveloping those locked inside. As the steel door slammed shut behind her, Naomi could clearly feel she was no longer a normal citizen. She had been shoved to the bottom of society, where no one cared about the truth. Inside the detention center, everything was harsh. The inmates, the guards, they all seemed resigned to being forgotten. Naomi was shoved into a small cell where a flickering light emitted a sickly yellow glow. The smell of mildew and sweat filled the air, making her feel nauseous. She didn't belong here. Every minute in the cell felt like an eternity. She couldn't stop thinking about Lena. Where was she? And who was taking care of her? Did Lena think she had abandoned her? The thought twisted Naomi's chest, but she could do nothing but wait. While Naomi languished in detention, the FBI continued to dig deeper into Crestview Bank's records. What they found was even more damning than they had initially anticipated. Victor Hahn sat in the FBI office, his eyes glued to the computer screen as data about Crestview Bank came to light. Large sums of money had gone missing from the system over the past 2 years, not just $85,000, but millions. A vast financial embezzlement network had been operating right under the noses of the regulatory bodies, and at the center of all these shady transactions was Arthur Whitmore, the regional director of the bank. Victor gritted his teeth. Now everything was clear. Arthur had used Naomi as a scapegoat, dumping all the blame on her to cover up the massive amounts of money he had stolen. But the bigger question remained. How had he managed to manipulate the entire legal system? Who had helped him? As Victor dug further, another name surfaced in the secret exchanges: Gregory Hawthorne. Judge Hawthorne wasn't just an enforcer of the law. He had been taking bribes from Arthur Whitmore and his partners to ensure that people like Naomi would be convicted without a chance to fight back. His past cases were riddled with unjust verdicts, but no one had dared to stand up against him. Victor took a deep breath. Everything had been arranged from the start. Arthur Whitmore had manipulated the banking system, and Hawthorne ensured that no one would uncover the truth by eliminating anyone who dared oppose him. Now Naomi was not just the victim of an embezzlement scheme. She was also a pawn in a massive corruption conspiracy. Victor knew he had to act quickly because if they didn't do something soon, Naomi Carter might never have a chance to see the light of freedom again. Journalist Sophia Reynolds sat in her small office at Crestview Times, her eyes fixed on the computer screen as an email from an anonymous source appeared in her inbox. Investigate the case of Naomi Carter. She's innocent, but powerful people want to make sure she never gets exonerated. Look into Crestview Bank and Judge Hawthorne. But be careful. This is not just a simple embezzlement. Sophia furrowed her brow. She had heard of Naomi Carter's case. A bank employee accused of embezzling $85,000 and detained before the official trial even began. At first glance, it seemed like just another financial case, but Sophia's instincts told her there was something wrong here. She quickly got to work. Upon checking Crestview Bank's records, Sophia discovered that Naomi Carter wasn't the only one accused. In recent years, several low-level employees had been fired or accused in connection with missing funds, but strangely, no one in the leadership had taken responsibility. Sophia picked up the phone and dialed an old contact at the FBI. Victor Hahn, can you talk? There was a brief silence before Victor answered. I'm busy, but if you have important information, speak quickly. Sophia lowered her voice, knowing the call might be monitored. I know you're investigating Naomi Carter. I have a feeling this isn't just a simple embezzlement. Crestview Bank has been involved in a series of similar cases in the past. I want to know if Naomi is truly a pawn in this. Victor inhaled deeply. You're sharp, Reynolds. But I can't confirm anything over the phone. If you want to pursue this, be careful. There are people who don't want the truth exposed. Sophia understood. She had faced danger before in her investigations, but this time, something sent a chill down her spine. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, bank employee Dennis Parker was packing up his things in his office. He was one of the few who had worked directly with Naomi Carter, and he knew she wasn't the one who embezzled the money. Over the past few weeks, Dennis had felt something wasn't right. He had seen Arthur Whitmore, the regional director, enter Naomi's office at hours when she wasn't there. He also knew that the bank's internal systems could be manipulated to alter transaction data. But the problem was, Dennis didn't know who to trust. That evening, as Dennis prepared to leave the bank, he received an anonymous text. If you want to stay alive, don't speak about Naomi Carter. A chill ran down his spine. He looked around an empty parking lot, only a few cars scattered under the dim street lights. He decided to leave the city that night. But as he walked toward his car, a black SUV suddenly appeared. The car door opened, and two men in suits stepped out. Dennis Parker? One of them spoke, his tone calm but dangerous. Dennis turned and ran, but before he could go far, a strong hand gripped his arm, pulling him into the vehicle. The SUV immediately drove off, disappearing into the night. The next morning, no one could find Dennis Parker. Victor Hahn was not one to be intimidated. But when he opened his filing cabinet in his office the next morning, a small envelope fell out. Inside was a single piece of paper with a scrawled message: "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Victor smirked. So, they knew he was digging too deep. He immediately called his colleague, Special Agent Lauren Mitchell, to increase security for witnesses. "We've lost track of Dennis Parker," he said, his voice tense. "He's the only witness who can prove Naomi was framed." Lauren sighed. Damn it. If they're involved, Dennis will never surface again. Victor tightened his grip on the phone. I don't believe in coincidences. Find him, by any means necessary. But before he could continue his plan, another message appeared on his phone. You can't save her. Stop investigating, or more people will disappear. Victor stared at the screen, a simmering anger rising within him. Did they think they could threaten him? He knew that if he continued, he was putting himself at risk. But if he stopped, Naomi Carter would be crushed by the system. And Victor Hahn was not the type to give up. The real battle was just beginning. Naomi Carter stepped into the courtroom once again, but this time she was not alone. The feelings of despair, isolation, and helplessness had been replaced by a fire burning in her chest. She didn't know what the FBI would do or if they could truly clear her name, but at least this time, she had hope. In the spectator seats, Sophia Reynolds sat quietly, her sharp eyes focused on the key players in the courtroom. Her voice recorder, tucked in her jacket pocket, was ready to capture any words that could change the course of the case. She had seen too many unjust trials, but today, she would not let that happen to Naomi Carter. Prosecutor Ethan LOL stood before the jury, as confident as ever. He had believed that today would be the final day of the case, a verdict in his favor and for those behind the scenes. But he had no idea that the curtain was about to be torn away from the truth. Naomi sat down in the defendant's chair, taking a deep breath. Across the room, Judge Gregory Hawthorne sat in his high chair, his face calm, but his eyes clearly showing disdain. He wanted to end the case quickly, but today things would not go as he hoped. Prosecutor Ethan LOL stepped forward, his voice smooth and confident, as though everything had been perfectly orchestrated. Your Honor, today we will present the final evidence showing that the defendant, Naomi Carter, embezzled funds and deliberately concealed the stolen money. But before he could continue, the courtroom door swung open. Special Agent Victor Hahn entered, holding a thick file, his gaze full of authority sweeping across the room. I apologize for the interruption, he said, his voice decisive. But if this court wants the truth, then here is the evidence. He walked quickly to the defendant's table, slamming the file down. All eyes turned to him, and the room became thick with tension, whispers filling the air. Judge Hawthorne raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, Victor continued. These documents prove that Judge Gregory Hawthorne has accepted bribes to ensure Naomi Carter was convicted. The room erupted in whispers, a shock wave of disbelief spreading across the courtroom. Sophia Reynolds clenched her fists. Finally, the truth was revealed. Victor stepped up to the podium, his voice sharp as a blade. We have evidence that Gregory Hawthorne received $150,000 from Arthur Whitmore, the director of Crestview Bank, to ensure Naomi Carter was convicted without a chance to defend herself. He flipped through a document, holding it up before the court. This is the bank statement from his personal account, showing the transfer from a shell company run by Whitmore. Naomi gasped. They had manipulated everything from the start. Judge Hawthorne turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about. This is a farce. I demand these documents be dismissed. But Victor merely smirked. I'm afraid you can't do that, because these documents have already been sent to the Attorney General's office and the Department of Justice. He turned to the police officers in the courtroom. And I think it's time to bring Gregory Hawthorne into custody. As soon as Victor finished speaking, the courtroom door swung open again. A group of FBI agents entered, led by Agent Lauren Mitchell. They were ready to make arrests. Arthur Whitmore, the mastermind behind the embezzlement, had been sitting in the audience. As soon as he saw the agents moving toward him, he jumped up and ran for the door, trying to escape. But he didn't get far. Arthur Whitmore, Lauren called coldly. You're under arrest for embezzlement, financial fraud, and bribery of public officials. Two agents immediately subdued him, handcuffing him in front of the astonished onlookers. He struggled, shouting, I'm innocent. You can't do this to me. But no one believed him. The entire room held its breath as all eyes turned to Judge Hawthorne. He could no longer maintain his composure. Sweat dotted his forehead, his hands trembling as he saw Arthur Whitmore, his ally, being arrested. Hawthorne blinked, suddenly standing up and trying to flee through the back exit. But he forgot that the FBI had been waiting for this moment. Victor Hahn smirked and nodded to his team. Take him. Two agents immediately blocked Hawthorne's path. One of them grabbed his arm and shoved him against the table. The handcuffs clicked tightly around Judge Gregory Hawthorne's wrists. Another judge's gavel rang out, declaring the trial adjourned immediately. But by then, the truth could no longer be hidden. Naomi sat still, her eyes blurred with tears, not because of fear, not because of sorrow, but because she had finally been exonerated. Prosecutor Ethan LOL stood in stunned silence, knowing that the game was up. As Gregory Hawthorne was dragged out of the courtroom, he snarled like an animal cornered. "We can still negotiate." "I can." Victor Hahn shrugged. "It's too late, Judge." A wave of silence swept through the courtroom. What seemed like a case already decided had now become the place where a massive corruption plot was exposed. Naomi never believed in miracles, but today she had witnessed one. Naomi Carter sat quietly in her cell. The weak rays of sunlight crept through the small window on the wall, casting shadows on the cold concrete floor. She had lost track of time, unsure of how long she had been sitting there, only knowing that every second felt like an endless nightmare. But today, something was different. The atmosphere in the prison no longer felt as oppressive as before. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Naomi lifted her head, her heart racing as the heavy metal door creaked open. A guard stood there, his eyes no longer cold like before. "Carter, stand up," he said calmly. "You're being released." Naomi stood frozen. Had she heard that right? Was this some cruel joke from the system? "Let's go," the guard repeated. "The release order has been signed. You're innocent." The words hit Naomi like an electric shock to the mind. Slowly, she stood up, her legs trembling from the stress and exhaustion of the past days. As she stepped out of the cell, every eye in the room was on her. Some of the inmates whispered. A few even smiled gently, as if they too were hoping for a miracle of their own. Outside the prison, Victor Hahn and Sophia Reynolds were waiting. When Naomi saw them step forward, Victor nodded, and Sophia couldn't hide the relieved smile on her face. But Naomi cared for no one except one person. She turned her head, and her heart tightened as she saw Lena. The little girl ran toward her mother, her small legs rushing across the yard, arms stretched wide, as if afraid her mother might disappear if she didn't hug her tightly at that moment. "Mom!" Naomi collapsed, wrapping her arms around her daughter, tears streaming down her face. She inhaled deeply, savoring the familiar scent of Lena's hair, feeling the warmth of her daughter pressed against her. She was back. Finally, she could hold her daughter without the looming threat of the cold prison walls. "We're going home, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice choked. "I promised you, didn't I?" Naomi's case wasn't just a typical trial. It had become a storm that swept through the entire Crestview judicial system. After Gregory Hawthorne was exposed, a number of his previous cases were brought into review. Victims who had been wrongfully convicted began to speak out. Journalists, including Sophia Reynolds, dug deep into the cases that had been hidden for years. Human rights organizations put pressure on local authorities to review the sentences Hawthorne had handed down. A federal investigation was launched, focusing on Crestview's court system. Unjust verdicts, powerful individuals manipulating the law for personal gain, all of it was brought to light. Naomi, though still weary and scarred by everything she had gone through, knew she couldn't stay silent. She agreed to do an interview with Sophia Reynolds, sharing her story not only to restore her own dignity, but also to give others the courage to stand up and fight for justice. "This isn't just my story," Naomi said in her first interview after being released. "This is the story of hundreds, even thousands, who've been crushed by a system that should have protected them." While Naomi was free, those who had tried to destroy her did not get the same outcome. Arthur Whitmore, the mastermind behind the embezzlement at Crestview Bank, faced a long list of financial charges, including money laundering, fraud, and bribing public officials. With overwhelming evidence from the FBI, he was sentenced to 35 years in prison with no possibility of parole. However, what shocked the public even more was the sentence handed down to Gregory Hawthorne. The once powerful judge of Crestview stood in the dock as a true defendant. The image of him in a prison uniform, hands cuffed, became a symbol of the downfall of a man who once arrogantly sat high above, judging the fate of others. When the sentence was read, 20 years for bribery, judicial manipulation, and abuse of power, he no longer had the mocking smile he once wore when Naomi stood before him. Hawthorne lowered his head, his face showing clear panic as he was led out of the courtroom. He had once believed he was untouchable, but in the end, even he couldn't escape the hand of justice. Naomi watched Hawthorne's trial on the screen, her hand tightly gripping Lena's. She didn't rejoice in his downfall, but she felt a sense of relief. Justice had finally been served. Naomi never returned to Crestview Bank. She knew she couldn't go back to the life she once knew, but she didn't run from her past either. She began working with organizations that helped those who had been wrongfully convicted, helping them seek justice. Her story became a powerful warning about what can happen when a system is manipulated and, at the same time, a beacon of hope that even when everything seems lost, justice can still prevail. On that journey, she was no longer alone. By her side was Lena, the little girl who had always believed in her mother. And this time, when she told her daughter, "Everything will be okay," she truly believed it. In life, there will be moments when you feel cornered, when everything seems to be against you, and justice feels like a distant dream. But remember, the truth may be hidden for a while, but it can never be buried forever. Whether you face injustice, betrayal, or a challenge that feels impossible to overcome, never lose hope. Justice may come late, but it will come. If Naomi Carter could fight and reclaim her freedom, then you can stand up for yourself too. Be strong, persistent, and believe in your own worth. Those who abuse their power may manipulate the system, but they can't manipulate the truth. When you fight for justice, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're also paving the way for others. Sometimes the biggest obstacles are stepping stones that make you stronger. Don't be afraid to face challenges. Use the pain, the failures, to build a stronger version of yourself. Life is not just about what happens to you, but how you respond to it. Alone, you may be weak, but with the right companion, you can change the world. Don't fight alone. Seek out those who share your values, those who believe in the truth and are willing to support you. A journalist, an FBI agent, or even just a friend, anyone can be the key to turning the tide. Finally, always remember, darkness can never last forever. As long as there is light, be the light for yourself, and you'll find your way. Thank you for joining us on this emotional and powerful journey. Naomi Carter's story is a testament to resilience, justice, and the power of truth. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect on the world we live in, don't let it end here. Share this video, spread the message, and most importantly, never stop fighting for what is right. If you believe in justice, in standing up against corruption, and in stories that reveal the raw truth of our society, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story from Emotional Journey. Your support means the world to us. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you, and see you in the next story.